He was like a father to them. He would also regularly perform yajna to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in fact, because of his sacrifices, it's described that his heart was completely pure. It's described in the Bhagavatam how day by day his devotion to Vasudeva would increase. And eventually, Bharat Maharaj, as many kings in Vedic culture, he decided to retire from his worldly duties. And he retired to a place in, anyone know the place? North India? Haridwar, in an ashram called Pulaha Ashram, near the river Gandaki. And there, he decided to live like a renunciate. It's described how he lived in a solitude place, a secluded place. He would subsist and survive on fruits and roots and bulbs. It's also described how he would collect water from the river every day. And like this, he lived very simply. And he would meditate on the form of the Lord. He would meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord. He would recite prayers from the Rig Veda. And so like this, he expressed his devotion to the Lord. And so pure was his devotion that he experienced ecstatic symptoms. It's described he was on the platform of Baba. Tears would flow up from his eyes as he would perform his meditation. His hairs would stand on end. So this was his exalted position. Then one day it's described how one morning he was performing his duties, and he happened to see one deer, and it was drinking water from the river Gandaki. And close by there was a lion present, and this lion roared very loudly. And hearing this deer became afraid and leapt across the river in fear. But while it was leaping across the river, from the womb of this deer, its child fell into the river. And because this mother deer was in so much fear, when it reached the other side of the river, it went into a cave, collapsed and died. Meanwhile, the child deer was drowning in the river. And so Bharat Maharaj, seeing this, he felt great compassion. And so he approached the deer and rescued the deer. And so this was the beginning of his fall down, actually. And Prabhupada quotes in the verse, in the purport, an interesting verse. Yam hi nyay vyanti ate purusham purushare shabha samasukha dukham dhiram samitra vaikagate. He explains that one, if he wants to attain liberation, he has to be undisturbed by happiness and distress. Material happiness and distress. He has to be completely undisturbed. So we see that because this deer was undergoing this material difficulty and distress, Bharat Maharaj was disturbed. And as a result, he abandoned his duties and rescued the deer. And it's described that because this deer had no mother, he felt compassion and he decided to care for this deer. It's described how he would maintain the deer. He would feed the deer grass personally with his hands. He would protect the deer from attacks of tigers and other animals. It's also described how he was very affectionate to the deer. He would pet the deer. He would scratch the deer if the deer was itching. It's even described how he would kiss the deer. So in this way he became absorbed in the deer. In fact, it's described that he began to abandon his duties. It's described how sometimes when he was performing his rituals, he would sometimes interrupt them because he was concerned and worried about what the deer was doing and if it was okay. He would sometimes, even during his meditations, he would externally be performing meditation, but internally, instead of thinking of the Lord, he was thinking of how the deer was doing. So this was how Maya creeped up on him. It said in the verses also sometimes how if he couldn't see the deer, he would think that he had lost the deer. And it's compared to just as someone who is very wealthy or rich, if he loses money, he's always thinking about how to obtain that money again. So this was how his absorption had changed. One minute he was on the platform of Baba, And now he's completely absorbed in the welfare of this deer. He would even sometimes in his illusion, he would sometimes refer to the deer as a young prince. Prabhupada explains an interesting point in the purport. He says that when someone becomes absorbed in loving affairs, he speaks like a madman. And he gives the example of, there was one blind man, there was one man and he had a blind son. And he called this son Padma Lochana, which means, oh, lotus-eyed one. So even though his son was blind, Bharat Maharaj was absorbed